Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Kenney Baden. As you know, we are covering a number of trials. We have a sentence. We're waiting for a sentence. It's really not a verdict watch in the case of George Nelson versus Florida, or Florida versus George Nelson. Sometimes it seemed like the reverse. Will the jury give him life, or will the jury give him death for the killing of poor Jennifer Fulford? Then we are live in two trials. We are following, and you can follow it on our website, lawandcrime.com, the case of Tennessee versus Roy Coons, another murder of a 12-year-old, as he's alleged to have done. And then we are absolutely following live here, and there is the coroner is on the stand, something near and dear to my heart, the case of Georgia versus the two Rosenbaums, Jennifer and Joseph, for the alleged murder of the daughter they were fostering. Her name was Layla. Let's go back into the court. Let's listen to what Donald Cleveland has to say. While they're admitting photographs, and you know trials, and it takes a while, and we're not going to show those photographs, I'd like to introduce my guest for the day, Chad. Chad Young, you were from Alabama. Your sister lives in Georgia. We discovered talking, and you are a trial attorney in New York, right?
Yes, I am.
So you know jury psychology well. So you are the juror right now. You're sitting in that jury box just like us. Let me ask you this. Where's the chicken tender?
That is exactly what I would be wanting to know if I were a member of that jury. I haven't heard all the opening statements from both sides yet, but from what I understand, there's been no mention of where this chicken is, or whether or not the autopsy report shows that there was actually chicken in little Layla's stomach.
So if you're the juror sitting there, you're waiting to hear that, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Because if there's no chicken, then there's no credibility to the defense, is there?
Then there's no defense.
Now,
that is her defense.
Now, you are a little one-up on us because you went to the website and you listened to the 911 tape off one of the news articles that you heard, and you had an impression when you listened to the 911 tape. What was your impression?
Interestingly enough, and by accident, the first thing I saw on this case was the 911 tape before I read any of the news reports or spoke with anyone else about the facts of this case. My first reaction when I heard that 911 tape was, this lady is establishing a defense. Then when I went and read some additional information about the case, I found out she's smart, she's educated, she worked in the prosecutor's office.
As an intern?
As an intern. I believe she's got some law school experience. I read somewhere a third-year law school student. So I think when she realized that, unfortunately, this horrible tragedy had happened with little Layla, that's when her brain kicked into action. She made that 911 call, and she started establishing her defense.
Well, we're going to have to see, Chad, if you are right. Let's go back into court and listen to what's happening on the stand with Donald Cleveland, the coroner. Okay, so the coroner, again, who is elected, he is not the doctor who did the autopsies, on the stand, showing the photos he took at the hospital of little Layla, who's, oh my God, 2 years old, Layla Mark Daniel. Ugh, just think about that poor gravestone. My guest, Chad Young, this child never had a chance, it appeared, right?
Absolutely not.
Now, the father, Joseph, they're represented by the same counsel, and I pointed out that in some states that would not be allowed. That's a conflict of interest in a criminal case you cannot waive, but here in Georgia it is allowed. I don't see much of him mentioned. Now, he did have one job at least as a correction officer, you said, and maybe a second. If he's not mentioned, why do you think he was indicted?
Well, my first thought was that the prosecutor indicted him on the murder charges because at first he was only charged with child abuse, child endangerment. He was not charged with murder. I think if the prosecutor thought they had any problem making the case stick against the wife, they brought the murder charges against him so that he would get on the stand and testify that it was all the wife's fault.
Well, that's interesting because he's there. If he was going to do that, why wouldn't he do that before and get a deal?
That's the big question.
Now with the chicken tender, again, I'm going to wait for that. I'm going to close the case of the missing chicken tender.
We all have to keep watching this
if we don't have it. Now, the 911 call you mentioned and the father we talked about, but let's just assume the defense attorney, Corinne Mull, gave a defense, and she said, here is going to be our defense. Our defense is that the Heimlich maneuver caused the pancreas to be lacerated, and it was halved. It was actually cut in half, but it was that's laceration, right? And that's what it was. She's not saying it was the CPR. That may be the liver. That may be something else. Does she need an expert for that? And how effective do you think that expert would be?
Oh, absolutely, you would need an expert. I mean, You need an expert anytime some information is beyond the common knowledge of the jury. So if a jury does not understand exactly how the Heimlich maneuver is performed, the possible dangers of internal injury if the Heimlich maneuver is performed inaccurately or too aggressively or too forcefully on a small child, the jury doesn't know that. Therefore, they need an expert to come in to learn that information so they can judge that defense.
Well, that's going to be really interesting, because my question to my medical examiner, I'm the prosecutor, Daisha Young, and she's really good, is have you ever seen that in your career? And he will say, or she will say, probably no. But, you know, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's go to a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Linda Kenney Baden. You haven't missed anything while we were on break. We are following the case, and we're actually going to show it when we can. It is Georgia versus Rosenbaum. That is Jennifer and Joseph that you are looking at sitting at counsel table. They have the same counsel. There's no conflict because they're both saying they're innocent. But right now, the coroner, whose name is Donald Cleveland, he's not the medical examiner, he's not a doctor, he is discussing and putting into evidence for the prosecution pictures of little Layla Daniel as he saw her at the hospital, and he is documenting through the pictures every marking he saw. It may not be a bruise, it may be a bruise, but we can't show that. But we, as you see, we're following it. So I'm going to discuss a little bit with my guest Chad Young, who is a trained trial lawyer, and when I say trained, he has all the tricks of the trade. I can tell because I've been speaking with you here at the bench. Now, when you first looked at this case, you had a thought that the defense, not the defense attorney, but the defense was being made up by the mother. So my question goes back to you. The father has not been mentioned. If the father knew the mother was doing something here, okay? Right? Can he be liable by omission for a murder?
Well, technically he can. And I think it's a little bit of a stretch to sort of make that sell that story to the jury. But I believe that the reason the prosecutor sort of put that fear in him is that he would defend himself against that murder charge and say, look, here's what I didn't know, here's what I did know, my wife did this, I didn't know this, so that he is not found convicted guilty of murder, but maybe of a lesser charge.
But he's a correction officer. If he is found guilty of anything and goes to prison, that's not good for him because there's a caste system in prison, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely.
And he'd be a target.
The worst person, I handled a lot of cases at Rikers Island involving excessive force and abuse by correctional officers upon inmates at Rikers Island. And the worst person that could possibly be incarcerated would be the person that was yelling at you yesterday.
Oh my God, and that would be worse. And we're going to see, but we're going to go right back into court. We believe Mr. Coroner Cleveland is on another area, not the pictures. By the way, there was no picture being shown of a chicken tender. We're waiting for that. Let's see what's going on now. We are back again because, again, they're still marking, and it goes to show you how important photography is in a criminal case. The coroner is putting in all the photos he took of poor 2-year-old Layla Mark Daniel at the hospital after she was deceased, and he's documenting every bruise. But the problem is, we're not going to show that to you here. But we're letting you know what's happening. But I will discuss with our guest something that did happen that you guys don't know about yet. Breaking. Before they took their break, there was a question about whether a juror had maybe nodded off or not. Now, the juror's still on. Nothing really happened because the bailiff went, and you have to come here, Chad Young, went something like, and I'm awake, I'm here. Now, you've had cases where there's been an allegation of a juror sleeping, right?
I have.
And did it matter?
Absolutely. I was in the middle of cross-examining a witness. I wanted the jury to hear my cross-examination.
Somebody fell asleep on you?
Absolutely.
Oh my God, that's not good, is it?
No.
No, right.
No.
So what did you do?
I did not want to offend that juror.
That's important, isn't it?
Make that juror mad at me.
Right. Because the juror may stay on the jury.
Or more importantly, have it affect my client.
Right.
I asked for a sidebar and went up to speak to the judge. I told the judge, without the jury being able to hear me, that juror number so-and-so was asleep. The judge said, I'll take care of it. I went back to my podium to continue my cross-examination. I didn't know what the judge was going to do, but then...
And the judge did what?
And the judge ordered the bailiff to drop a book.
Well, that's an interesting
very
thing,
loud.
Because we've all had these situations. I had a juror in a federal case, too. I thought it was asleep. It was like this. Okay. Now, you don't want your host to be asleep on the air, right? Like I just pretended for a second. You don't want your jury to be asleep in the jury box. But it turns out the juror was not asleep, was listening to everything, and was one of my biggest proponents in the jury room. So you never know what a jury's going to do you?
So maybe the next time I think a juror is sleeping, I'll second guess myself.
Yeah, maybe you should. Now, in this case, though, let's assume the juror nodded off and it's during the defense maybe closing or something like that. If you're the defense now, you're not happy, even if the juror was awake but not paying much attention to you, are you?
Well, you know, I'm going to take a cue from the judge that handled the situation that I found myself involved in. I think if I were giving a closing statement and I saw one of
How about an opening statement?
Or an opening statement, and I noticed one of the jurors was asleep, I would clap my hands, I would raise my voice just a little louder, I would stomp my foot on a very important point. I would do something just to create a noise that would potentially wake.
But let me ask you this: does that take away from the fact that, like in this case, we have a dead 2-year-old? The defense says, hey, look, it was CPR that caused one of the lacerations of the liver, and it was the Heimlich maneuver that caused the pancreas to be lacerated, okay? They have a right, the state has to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt. Do you take the risk and maybe offend the juror, and so when they go in the jury room, they're not going to be for you no matter what?
Well, also, you could have the judge speak to the juror, right? Do you have a medical condition? Are you on medication?
Well, that's interesting.
Something of that nature that is going to prevent you from being able to stay awake and alert and hear both sides' arguments in this case. It may be that there's some reason they were not going to be able to stay awake for the entirety of the jury.
Well, we hope you stay awake here on the Law&Crime Network, because this is a fascinating case. It deserves to be heard. There is a dead child. There are 2 people on trial, and we have an amazing prosecutor, and we have the justice systems on trial. You have to prove your case beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's see if the prosecution continues. But first, a break. Let's go to it. Welcome back to the Law&Crime Network. I'm Kenney Baden. I have been watching while you have been on break. And guess what? They are on pictures. They're in number 70. So we're back in photos. We're going to, I think, maybe talk a little bit, right? We're going to talk a little bit with my Chad Young. You are my first time guest, right?
Yes.
And you have taken a look at this case, and I use you right now as a juror because you went online and looked at some of the evidence that the jury is going to hear. Now, part of it was mentioned in opening, and that is that the child, Layla, 2 years old when she died, in the care of the Rosenbaums when she died, had some broken bones. Supposedly, according to the defense opening, they happened when the child was in gymnastics and other places. Now, according to the police, you said that the police had no record of that. So how can the defense prove the child was at gymnastics when the police said there's no record of her being at gymnastics?
Right. So I am just a little ahead of the jury right now because of the research I've done, which, as we know, juries are not allowed to do.
Well, but the defense attorney is a little ahead, too, so she's telling stuff to the jury. So why would she say that?
She better be able to bring forth a witness to back up that Layla was at this gymnastics school, because it's my understanding that the police interviewed the gymnastics school and it was communicated to the police by the school that they have no record of Layla being there. So now in the opening statement, the defense said you're going to hear that she was there, which is a contradiction of what I believe other evidence in the case shows. So they're going to have to be able to explain that somehow. I can't imagine how they would do that without someone from the school testifying.
Well, I think they're going to have to have a witness, because the one thing you learn with juries, you do not lie to a jury. You may be able to lie to your husband, your partner, your sister, your mother, but not to a jury, because you will get caught. Let's go back in the courtroom and see what the coroner is doing right now. Well, that is the coroner. He is going to be subject afterwards to some cross-examination in this case. But I have some real breaking news in the George Nelson case. And no, it's not a verdict yet, a sentencing verdict about whether he gets death or life. The defense has already filed a motion for a new trial. Chad Young, the grounds are that the verdict of murder that the jury found he was guilty of is against the contrary to the law. When he admitted it, how could this be?
I want to see that motion. I don't know about you because I have the same question. It's my understanding that he got up on the stand, admitted everything, blamed everyone else but himself for his own actions. So I can't imagine what those grounds are.
Well, there's more grounds. They said the court erred in letting things into evidence, such as the knife that was used allegedly on Jennifer Fulford, and that certain statements were allowed into evidence that should not be allowed into evidence. So basically what they're saying is there's an accumulation of these 7 errors, and therefore he needs a due trial. Does that work?
No, because
well, that was a quick answer.
You
Yes,
still,
tell me why.
it's the right answer because you still have to be able to show that those errors could have changed the outcome of the verdict, of the jury verdict. And if you have a witness on the stand testifying that he committed the murder, what does it matter if the knife came in or a statement came in when you get on the stand and you admit that you did it?
So you're saying that those errors, if they were, and they may not even be, are harmless because they could never have affected the verdict because Mr. Nelson got up and said, I did it. I'm a homicidal maniac, as a matter of fact.
Fine. You want to keep the knife out of the next trial? You want to keep some statements out of the next trial? Fine. You know what you can't keep out of the next trial?
His statements that he made in this trial.
His testimony.
Right. Oh, my gosh. Wow. What a case that is. We're still waiting, obviously, for whether or not he gets life or death, George Nelson in Florida. But right now, we're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. Okay, so you had redirect, recross. So that's the coroner, Donald Cleveland. Now, I have a question here, Chad Young. He said that the mother said to him that she came down the stairs, found the child shaking in the high chair when she came back from getting ready from the Board of Commissioners meeting. And then she picked up and performed CPR. We have an active chat room. Our chat room follows every word. Don47 said she didn't say she did the Heimlich maneuver. Does that hurt her because it was an inconsistent statement, or is it just irrelevant?
Well, we don't know when she did the Heimlich maneuver. I mean, she had to get the child out of the high chair to get them in a position to be able to perform the Heimlich maneuver. I think this may actually play well for the defense, and here's why. It could help explain why this child is covered in bruises from head to toe. If you're jerking the child out of a high chair rather than releasing them the way you're supposed to, you're knocking their legs, you're banging their feet, that could explain bruises.
Yeah, well, that's what defense attorneys do. Good defense attorneys like Chad Young do. Thank you, Chad. Okay, so stay with us. We will be covering this trial tomorrow. We're again waiting for George Nelson to see what the jury does, life or death there. But Aaron Keller, the Daily Debrief, on next. He will cover all this. And guess who's his guest? Me. So stay tuned. The Law&Crime Network. Only here will you hear all the trials that you are interested in. Thank you for watching.